Welcome, and thank you for being here. This ebook is not simply a collection of chapters. It is an invitation to pause, to listen, and to gently turn your attention inward. In the quiet moments of life, when achievement, responsibility, or routine no longer fully explain what you feel, something deeper often begins to stir. A question, a longing, a sense that there is more to who you are becoming. The journey you are about to step into unfolds in 5 living movements, recognizing what has been quietly asking for your awareness, rebalancing the inner space you carry each day, reframing the way you see yourself and your story, rejuvenating your sense of purpose and possibility, and finally, renewing the way you move forward in the world. Along the way, you will meet individuals who reflect pieces of your own experience, moments of restlessness, courage, uncertainty, and quiet hope. Their stories are not meant to instruct, but to remind you that growth often begins in small, honest recognitions. A pause before dawn, a question written in a journal, a choice to rest, to believe, or to begin again. As you listen, allow these words to meet you where you are. There is no finish line here, no version of perfection to reach. There is only a gentle unfolding, an ongoing return to what feels true, aligned, and alive within you. So take a breath, settle into this moment, and when you're ready, let's begin this journey together. Chapter 1. The Opening Awakening. Sometimes, change does not arrive as a dramatic thunderclap. More often, it slips in quietly, like the first hint of dawn breaking over a darkened sky. It may appear as a slight, persistent restlessness, a heaviness in the chest, or a fleeting sense of dissatisfaction with life as you've known it. These subtle signals are your inner self speaking, urging you to pause, to notice, to listen. They are not signs of weakness. Instead, they are invitations to your own renewal. Awakening often begins within the body. Your nervous system, carrying years of experience, memory, and emotional residue, can signal when it is ready for a shift. You might feel tension gathering in your shoulders, a flutter in your stomach, or a wave of unexplained fatigue that lingers throughout your day. These sensations are your body's way of communicating what is often unspoken, a language that transcends words and thought. Scientists studying stress and emotional health have found that the body usually speaks first, long before the mind fully understands what is happening. For example, you might find yourself suddenly irritable or tearful without a clear cause, or perhaps you experience a deep yearning for change that can feel both exciting and intimidating. These physical responses can serve as premonitions, nudging you toward necessary transitions. Listening to these bodily cues is the first step toward aligning with your inner truth. Ignoring them might lead to a cycle of discontent, in which the disconnect between your external life and your internal desires continues to widen. Conversely, acknowledging these feelings can be a powerful catalyst for transformation. By taking the time to tune in, you create space to explore the emotions and thoughts that accompany these sensations. Consider setting aside moments in your day to check in with yourself. What does your body feel like? Is there tension you can release? Are there areas of discomfort that need acknowledgement? You might begin a practice of mindfulness or journaling to articulate your feelings, allowing yourself to attend to the subtleties of your surface experience. This conscious engagement not only fosters self-awareness, but also empowers you to speak your truth and advocate for your needs. When you embrace your feelings of restlessness, heaviness, or dissatisfaction as invitations to change, you can cultivate a deeper relationship with yourself. This journey of self-discovery encourages you to explore what you truly want and need. As you begin to unpack the layers of discomfort, you will uncover the motivations behind your feelings, whether it is a longing for a more fulfilling career, a need for deeper connections, or a call to personal growth. Embracing the shift doesn't mean that transformation will happen overnight. Instead, it's a gradual unfolding, much like the dawn that slowly brightens the sky. Each small acknowledgement of your feelings is a step toward clarity and change. Through this process, you'll begin to identify the changes you want to make, amplifying your ability to create a life that is in harmony with your deepest values and desires. As you navigate this path of awakening, remember that it's okay to seek support. Sharing your experiences with trusted friends, mentors, or a therapist can provide additional perspectives and guidance. After all, transformation is not a solitary journey. It's a shared experience that can thrive in community. Stepping into the next chapter of your life begins with the courage to listen, the willingness to feel, and the determination to act, making way for the profound renewal that awaits you. I want to share 3 human stories that reflect how this quiet awakening can appear. Maya's story. The rain had begun to fall, soft and insistent, blurring the city lights into streaks of gold and blue outside her window. Maya pressed her palm gently against the cold glass, as if trying to reach through the reflection to the person she barely recognized. The whisper in her chest grew louder, not in volume, but in clarity, like the first clear note of a song emerging from static. "You are more than what you do." She laughed, a fragile, breathy sound that startled her. How absurd to feel so lost in a life that others envied. Her calendar was color-coded perfection. Her accomplishments filled folders. Yet none of it had touched the quiet girl who used to lie in the backyard of her childhood home, tracing constellations with her finger and believing wholeheartedly that magic was real. The next morning, instead of reaching for her phone to check emails, Maya slipped on her worn hiking boots, dusty from years untouched, and drove north, beyond the sprawl of the city, where the roads turned to gravel and the trees leaned close together like old friends whispering secrets. She parked beside a forgotten trailhead marked only by a fading wooden sign. Whisper Falls 2.3 miles. No map, no checklist, just movement. With each step, the weight in her chest loosened. Birdsong replaced the hum of notifications. The earth, damp with morning dew, gave slightly beneath her feet. She passed wildflowers blooming defiantly between rocks, their petals bright against the gray bark of fallen trees. For the first time in years, she wasn't measuring time in minutes or goals. She was simply breathing. When she reached the falls, it wasn't grand or dramatic, just a gentle cascade spilling over moss-covered stones into a clear pool below. She sat on a flat rock, pulled off her socks, and dipped her toes into the icy water. A gasp escaped her. It was so real, so present. She closed her eyes, and then, from somewhere deep within, a place long buried beneath spreadsheets and self-doubt, came a memory. At 8 years old, Maya had filled a notebook with drawings of faraway lands and creatures stitched from starlight. She called it the Book of Elsewhere. Her mother had smiled, called her imaginative, then gently suggested she focus on practical things. Maya had tucked the notebook away, but never forgotten it. Now, with the mist from the falls cooling her face, she opened an app on her phone. Not her calendar, not her email, but a blank document. She titled it the Book of Elsewhere, Revision. She began to write. Not resumes, not to-do lists, but stories, poems, silly dreams, and wild what-ifs. She wrote about a girl who could talk to rivers, and a city floating above the clouds where people measured wealth and laughter. She wrote about sorrow, too, the ache of forgetting oneself, and the quiet courage it took to begin again. By the time she drove home, the sky was painted in twilight hues, and her heart felt tender, like newly healed skin. The kitchen still held the faint scent of the tea she'd left brewing the night before. Her reflection in the window looked different now. Still tired, yes, but softer. Listening, Maya lit a candle, folded a blanket around her shoulders, and as the flame danced, she whispered back to the quiet voice in her chest, "I'm here. I'm listening." And so, slowly, the real work began. Not the work of achievement, but of reclamation, of remembering that a life well lived isn't always polished. Sometimes it's messy, uncertain, full of detours and dawns you never saw coming. Maya didn't know where the path would lead, but for the first time in years, she was excited to find out. James' story. James, a devoted father of 2, began waking in the middle of the night with his heart racing and shoulders stiff. Initially, he blamed deadlines, work stress, and the noise of daily life. But as the weeks passed, he noticed a pattern. Every time he ignored these signals, his tension grew heavier. He began to understand that his body was speaking a language he had long overlooked. This awakening was subtle yet profound, a gentle insistence from his own being that he attend to what he had neglected for too long, his emotional and inner life. The night after the third warning spike, James sat up in bed, the ceiling fan humming a soft, steady rhythm that seemed to echo his pulse. The darkness of his bedroom felt suddenly thick, as if it were a veil he could no longer ignore. He slipped his phone off the nightstand, turned off the bedroom light, and let the quiet settle around him like a warm blanket. For the first time in years, he didn't flip through emails or scroll through headlines. He simply listened. He heard the faint, rhythmic sigh of his own breathing, the low thrum of his heart, and a subtle murmur that rose from his chest, almost as though someone were whispering from within, "You're still here." It was a momentary glimpse of the language his body had been trying to write. In that instant, James realized that the tension in his shoulders wasn't just a symptom of workload. It was a storage of emotions he'd never allowed himself to name. Grief over the loss of his father, guilt for missing his son's school play, a quiet yearning for the creativity he'd tucked away in college, and the unspoken fear that he might be failing at the one role that mattered most, being a present parent. The following morning, James moved through his routine with a different awareness. While making coffee, his hands trembled just enough to pour a little extra, spilling a speck across the counter. Instead of brushing it away with irritation, he paused, stared at the dark stain, and said quietly to himself, "Even the coffee knows I'm spilling." A gentle smile cracked his face, and he wiped the spot, feeling a tiny shift in his chest, a release, however minuscule. At lunch, he tried something he'd read in an online article about body mapping. He pulled a notebook from his bag, opened it to a fresh page, and began to draw a simple silhouette of a human figure. He shaded the shoulders a deep violet, the chest a muted red, and labeled each region with the emotions that seemed to cluster there: responsibility, resentment, loneliness. The act of externalizing his internal map felt like turning on a light in a dim room. The lines he drew held a strange kind of truth. The colors weren't random. They were the palette of his lived experience. When he got home that evening, his wife, Maya, noticed the notebook on the coffee table, its pages bristling with scribbles and color swatches. "What's that?" she asked, curiosity softened by concern. James hesitated, then lifted the cover, showing her the figure. "I think my body's been trying to tell me something," he said, his voice steadier than it had been all week. "I'm finally listening." Maya sat beside him, her hand finding his. "We all get so busy," she whispered, "that we forget the simple act of feeling. I'm proud of you for noticing." Their conversation stretched into the night, spilling over the kitchen table. James spoke about the loss he'd never processed, the expectations he'd placed on himself, and the small moments he'd missed, like the way his daughter, Lily, would hum a tune while drawing, or how his son, Noah, would stare out the window, waiting for his dad to ask about his day. In the weeks that followed, James turned his nocturnal awakenings into a ritual. He set an alarm for 3 a.m., not to work, but to sit on the balcony with a blanket, a mug of tea, and his notebook. He practiced breathing techniques he learned from a short meditation video. Inhaling for a count of 4, holding for 2, exhaling for 6. The stiff shoulders began to loosen, not instantly, but like a rope that had been wrapped tightly for years, slowly unwinding. He also began a simple, intentional practice with his children. The 5-minute check-in. Every evening after dinner, they gathered on the couch, and each person took a turn saying 3 things. One thing that made them happy today, one thing that made them uneasy, and one thing they were grateful for. The first few attempts were awkward, punctuated by giggles and half-spoken words, but soon the routine became a safe harbor where emotions could drift up and be acknowledged without needing to be fixed. One Saturday, a sudden summer storm rolled over the suburb, drenching the neighborhood in a sudden downpour. The power flickered, and their house went dark. In a candlelit living room, the family huddled together, listening to the rain hammer the tin roof. James felt a familiar knot form in his chest, the old reflex to panic. He inhaled deliberately, felt the rhythm of his heart steady, and then, with a quiet voice, he said, "I'm scared of the dark, but I'm grateful we're together." The words hung in the air, and his children echoed back, their voices trembling but honest. The storm passed, the lights came back, and in that shared moment of vulnerability, James realized something profound. The language his body was speaking was not a separate, isolated script. It was a conversation woven through the lives of the people he loved. The tension that once seemed to bind him had become a bridge, a reminder that he was not alone in feeling, that his inner world could be shared, understood, and healed in the company of those who mattered most. Months later, as James walked his kids through the park on a crisp autumn afternoon, he paused at the edge of a pond, watching his reflection ripple in the water. The skin on his neck no longer felt as tight. The breath in his chest rose and fell with a gentle ease. In that moment, he recognized the profound shift within himself, a testament to his journey of self-discovery. The pond reflected not just their faces, but the sky above, a canvas of shifting clouds. It served as a reminder that the weather inside us is constantly changing. As the inner landscape described, he realized that with intention, we can learn to read our emotions, breathe with them, and most importantly, live with them. Just as the book emphasizes the importance of recognizing, rebalancing, and rejuvenating, James felt empowered to navigate the changing tides of his inner world and embrace the journey ahead. Lila's story. Lila had spent most of her life silencing her intuition. Practicality, discipline, and logic were valued above all else, and she believed she had to follow a path laid out by others' expectations. Yet, on a quiet afternoon while walking alone on a forest trail, she felt a sudden wave of clarity, accompanied by an unexpected sadness. Her gut, long ignored, was finally impossible to silence. In that moment, she realized that the messages she had dismissed for years were not obstacles. They were guides. Her awakening was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it marked the beginning of a lifelong journey toward listening to herself first. These stories may feel familiar because awakening is rarely extraordinary. It often emerges in the ordinary moments, the quiet stillness that fills the air, thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. In these subtle signals and slight pangs of discomfort, a whisper arises. Something needs attention. Recognizing these gentle nudges is the first courageous step toward reclaiming your life from autopilot, especially in the pauses when the world seems to hold its breath. Lila paused beneath the outstretched arms of an ancient oak, her hand brushing the rough bark as if testing for a pulse. The sadness she'd felt wasn't sorrow for something lost, but grief for something never lived. Her, the woman she might have been if she'd trusted herself sooner. A golden leaf, caught mid-descent, spiraled down and landed softly in her open palm. It was autumn, and time seemed to echo the season, everything in transition, letting go, preparing for rebirth. She smiled, not because she was happy, but because she recognized the truth in the motion. There is no growth without release. That night, she sat at the edge of her bed and pulled out an old notebook, the kind once used for to-do lists and meeting agendas. She opened it to a blank page, hesitated, then wrote 3 words: "I feel seen." It wasn't much, but it was honest. And for the first time in years, the weight on her chest loosened just enough to let her breathe. From then on, Lila began to slow down, not out of laziness, but with intention. She stopped scheduling her mornings before they started. She brewed tea without checking her phone. She walked out to get somewhere, but to listen. The messages returned, gentle at first. Don't take that job. Walk away from that conversation. Say no. Rest. They were no longer muffled, no longer drowned out by the noise of shoulds and musts. Instead, they arrived with the quiet certainty of tides. One rainy Thursday, she canceled a client meeting, an important one she would have once rescheduled her life for. Instead, she painted. Not well, not perfectly, messily, with bright blues and defiant reds. She painted the forest, the tree, the leaf. She painted the feeling of standing there, finally awake. When her boss called later, concerned, she didn't apologize. She said, "I needed to honor something deeper than a calendar." She didn't know if she'd keep her job, but she knew she couldn't lose herself again. Awakening, she realized, wasn't a single event. It was a series of moments, choosing the quiet over the loud, the true over the convenient. It was trusting the ache in her chest when she forced a smile, celebrating the warmth in her stomach when she laughed without performing. It was noticeable how her body relaxed when she whispered, "This is mine," and claimed her time, her voice, her dreams. Months passed. She started a small blog, not to become famous, but to remember what she learned. She wrote about intuition as if it were an old friend returning from exile. She shared stories of missed signs, of second chances, of the courage it takes to turn inward when the world demands you look out. And people responded, not because she had all the answers, but because she dared to ask the questions. One morning, a letter arrived from a stranger. "I read your words and felt permission, something I didn't know I needed. Thank you for listening first, so I could remember how to hear myself." Lila folded the letter carefully and placed it in the same notebook where it had all begun. Outside, the first leaves of spring trembled on their branches. She stepped on the trail again, this time with no destination. She was no longer following a path. She was becoming it. Food for thought. Our bodies hold the imprints of our past experiences, stress, grief, unprocessed emotions, and ingrained survival patterns. Contemporary research in psychology and neuroscience reveals that our bodies frequently signal the need for change even before our conscious minds catch up. Symptoms such as a tight chest, a knot in the stomach, fatigue, or irritability can serve as early indicators of a deeper call to renewal. By approaching these signals with curiosity instead of judgment, we take the vital first step toward self-compassion, reflection, and invitation. Take a quiet moment now. Find a comfortable space, close your eyes if it feels safe, and breathe deeply. Ask yourself, where in my body do I feel tension, heaviness, or discomfort? What emotions have I been ignoring or dismissing? What small step could I take today to honor the whispers of my inner self? Write down whatever comes to mind. There is no right answer. Each insight, no matter how small, is a seed of awakening. Remember, the journey is not about perfection. It is about presence, awareness, and the gentle unfolding of your own light. Chapter 2. Understanding the weight you carry. Many of us navigate life with invisible weights, burdens formed not only by our personal experiences, but also by the expectations imposed on us by society, family, and culture. These burdens often accumulate silently, layering over our sense of self and well-being. Some of these weights stem from choices we made, influenced by the circumstances and values surrounding us. Others, however, were thrust upon us long before we could fully comprehend or resist them, such as our parents' unfulfilled dreams or the social pressures that dictate how we should act and feel. This emotional weight can manifest in various ways, often appearing as anxiety, restlessness, self-doubt, or an ever-present heaviness that lingers in our minds and bodies. When left unexamined, these feelings can become our default emotional responses, affecting how we engage with ourselves and the world. For example, a sense of restlessness might push us to distract ourselves with busyness or consumption, preventing us from confronting the underlying causes of our discomfort. Similarly, persistent self-doubt can keep us from pursuing opportunities that bring us joy and fulfillment. The process of release begins with recognition. It is essential to acknowledge that carrying this emotional weight is a profoundly human experience. Neuroscience reveals that our brains and bodies encode emotional experiences as patterns. These patterns shape our reactions and interpretations of new experiences. When we encounter situations that resonate with past burdens, these ingrained reactions can trigger anxiety or fear, even if the current context does not warrant such responses. Recognizing these patterns does not equate to assigning blame to ourselves. Instead, it represents a courageous step toward awareness, a crucial component in the journey of reclaiming our power. Acknowledging these burdens allows us to begin untangling the threads of our emotional histories. This journey requires us to gently confront our feelings and experiences, accepting them as part of our narrative while also understanding that they do not define our entirety. In this process, we can learn to separate our identity from the weights we carry. This distinction enables us to choose more consciously how we respond to the world, fostering resilience and self-empowerment. By shining a light on our invisible burdens, we can initiate a transformative dialogue with ourselves, paving the way for healing and personal growth. Ultimately, becoming aware of the weight we carry is the first step in a liberating journey towards self-acceptance and emotional freedom. Here are 3 stories that illustrate how people begin to uncover the burdens they carry. Anna's story. Anna had grown up in a home where survival meant being responsible for everyone else's happiness. By the time she was an adult, she was exhausted, yet constantly seeking to prove her worth. She realized that her overfunctioning was not a strength, but a weight she had carried for decades. A quiet evening at home became a turning point. She noticed her body aching, her mind racing, and felt a sudden clarity. Her life had been built around the needs of others, leaving her own spirit depleted. The clock ticked softly against the wall, marking time she had long ignored. Outside, a late spring rain tapped gently at the window pane, washing the city in silver light. She sat on the edge of the couch, bare feet pressed into the cool wood floor, and for the first time in years, allowed herself to be, without agenda, without apology, simply. Tears came not from sadness, but from recognition. It was as if she had been speaking in someone else's language her whole life, fluently conversing in duty, obligation, and care, while her own voice, the quiet, curious, creative hum beneath, had been muted beneath layers of shoulds and musts. She thought of the countless times she had canceled plans with herself, the walk she skipped, the book left unread, the dream of painting abandoned because it wasn't practical. That night, she did something radical. She turned off her phone, poured a cup of chamomile tea she'd bought months ago and never used, and sat in the silence. No music, no list-making, no mental rehearsals of tomorrow's conversations. Just breathe, just the rain, just her. And in that stillness, a whisper arose, not loud or demanding, but tender. "What do you want, Anna?" She wasn't sure she remembered how to answer, but the question itself felt like a key turning in a rusted lock. Over the next few weeks, she began small rebellions against her old life. She said no to a friend's birthday party, not out of malice, but because she needed time alone to rest. She let the dishes pile in the sink while she walked through the park, watching sunlight dapple the leaves. She bought a set of watercolor paints and painted a clumsy, joyful mess of blue and gold on thick, expensive paper, just because it felt good. She started therapy, where she spoke of her mother's silent tears, her father's distant expectations, and the unspoken rule that love came with conditions. Be helpful. Be perfect. Be small. Slowly, her body began to change. The knots in her shoulders loosened. She slept more deeply. Laughter came more easily, unforced. She noticed things. The way her cat curled in her lap with trust, the taste of ripe strawberries, the way her breath caught when she saw a field of wildflowers. Anna wasn't becoming a different person. She was uncovering the one who had always been there, buried beneath service and sacrifice, but never erased. She was learning that to care for herself wasn't selfish. It was sacred. That boundaries weren't walls, but gates she got to open and close with intention. And one crisp autumn morning, as she stood on her balcony with steam rising from her mug, watching golden leaves spiral to the ground, she whispered to the wind, "I'm here. I'm listening. And I'm not going anywhere." For the first time in her life, Anna wasn't running toward anyone else's light. She was beginning to glow on her own. David's story. David had long felt numb, a subtle emotional flatline that made it hard for him to connect with friends, family, or even his own passions. Over time, he began to notice that his avoidance of feelings was a learned response to pain he had endured in childhood. What once protected him now limited him. The awakening came gradually as he started journaling, reflecting, and acknowledging the emotional weight he had carried silently for years. He began to think of his inner world as a house he had built in the dark, a cramped attic full of forgotten trunks and dust-covered mementos. Each night, when the city's neon hummed through his window, he would sit at the small desk by the radiator, a notebook open to a fresh page, and start placing one battered suitcase after another onto the floor. The first entry was short and tremulous. "I'm a child again, clutching the edge of a swing set that no longer exists. The wind feels cold, but the metal is warm." He didn't know why that image surfaced, only that it felt honest. The words felt like a key turning in a lock he hadn't realized was rusted shut. From that moment, the notebook became his compass, and the attic, once a place he avoided, started to reveal its layout. He discovered a small wooden box tucked behind a stack of old school reports. Inside lay a cracked Polaroid of his mother, taken at a carnival, both of them smiling with cotton candy-colored faces. Beneath it, a handwritten note read, "Don't forget to dance, even if the music stops." The simplicity of the message struck him like a sudden chord in a muted room. He realized that his avoidance had been a way to silence the soundtrack of his life, a self-imposed pause that had lasted for decades. One rainy Thursday, David decided to take his notebook to the community center's weekly mindfulness group. The room smelled of sandalwood and brewed tea. A gentle woman named Lila led the circle. She asked each participant to close their eyes and listen for the first sound that the rain makes inside you. As the group fell silent, David felt a low, throbbing echo, like the distant drumming of a heart he hadn't let beat for years. When he opened his eyes, he saw Lila's smile, warm and unhurried. "Do you hear it?" she asked, leaning forward. "The rain doesn't fall only outside. It falls inside us, too. We can learn to let it wash over the walls we've built." After the session, David lingered. "I've been trying to write down things that I can't quite name," he said, holding up his notebook. "It feels like I'm excavating a burial ground." Lila nodded. "Stories are never really buried. They're just waiting for someone to turn the soil. You started turning it. Keep digging, but remember to bring water." The following week, he returned with a sketch, a thin, trembling sapling pushing through cracked concrete. He titled it Hope's First Breath. In his journal that night, he wrote, "I am learning that feeling isn't a betrayal. It is a bridge. The more I walk across it, the steadier the planks become." Days turned into weeks, and the attic began to fill with new objects, letters he had written to his younger self, a small figurine of a dancer he bought at a flea market, and a crumpled ticket stub from the very day his mother took him to that carnival, now long forgotten. Each artifact sparked a conversation with the part of him that had been locked away. One Saturday morning, while sorting through the old trunks, he found a faded notebook belonging to his father. Its pages were filled with sketches of airplanes, notes about weather patterns, and a single, repeated line, "Find the sky, even when the clouds are thick." The realization settled in his chest like a gentle weight. His father's avoidance had been different, outward, adventurous, but it, too, was a form of escape. In that moment, David understood that avoidance was a family dialect, spoken in many accents. He could respect his father's yearning for horizons while honoring his own need to feel the earth beneath his feet. The attic, once a tomb, was now a gallery. The transformation didn't happen in a single glorious epiphany. Some mornings, he still woke to a numb fog that clung to his limbs. Other mornings, the world seemed to pulse with color he could finally name: emerald grief, amber joy, indigo fear. He learned to sit with each, to let the emotions settle like sediment in a river, and to watch them reshape his path. One evening, after a particularly intense therapy session where he finally vocalized the childhood abandonment that had haunted his dreams, David stepped onto the balcony of his apartment. The city lights flickered below like constellations, and the wind whispered through the fire escape. He pulled the journal from his coat pocket, opened it to the last page, and wrote, "I am no longer a wanderer in the dark hallways of my own mind. I'm a cartographer, mapping the terrain of my heart, one feeling at a time. The attic is no longer a place I hide from. It is the first room I welcome guests into." He closed the notebook, placed it on the railing, and let the night air lift the pages gently. As the wind rustled the paper, a single leaf from a nearby tree drifted down, landing softly on the open page. David smiled, realizing that the leaf, delicate, fragile, yet persistent, was precisely how his emotions felt now. Something to be observed, not feared. From that night onward, the attic was no longer an attic. It became a studio, a sanctuary, a place where he could paint, write, dance, and most importantly, feel. And every time he returned to his notebook, he added a new line, a new sketch, a new memory, each a testament to a man who finally allowed himself to be alive, fully, painfully, beautifully. Sophia's story. Sophia's relationships often ended with frustration or confusion. She realized that patterns repeated. She was drawn to people who mirrored the unhealed aspects of her family history. Through therapy and self-reflection, she discovered that she had internalized beliefs about love, safety, and worthiness that no longer served her. Recognizing these inherited patterns was the first step toward lightening her load. Now, she began the slow work of rewriting the story she told herself, the one that whispered she had to earn affection, that silence was safer than vulnerability, that love meant sacrifice rather than reciprocity. Each morning, she sat by her window with a cup of chamomile tea and a journal, tracing the contours of old wounds not to reopen them, but to finally name them. "I am not responsible for fixing broken people," she wrote one rainy Tuesday, the ink smudging under a single tear. "And I am not broken for wanting peace." She started setting boundaries, not as walls, but as gentle fences around her energy. When an old flame reappeared, charming and chaotic as ever, she didn't spiral into the familiar dance of hope and heartbreak. Instead, she smiled, wished him well, and walked away. It wasn't cold. It was clarity. She began to notice beauty in stillness, the way sunlight pooled on her bedroom floor, the rhythm of her breath during meditation, the joy of eating a meal without distraction. With each act of presence, she reclaimed parts of herself that had long been bartered for approval. And then came Leo, not urgent, not intense, but steady. He listened as if it were an act of love. He laughed easily and didn't flinch when she spoke of her therapy, her fears, her growing awareness. "You're becoming," he said once, watching her sketch ideas in her journal. "It's beautiful to witness." For the first time, Sophia didn't feel the urge to mold herself into someone's savior or shadow. With Leo, she simply was. And in that space, love didn't feel like a battlefield or a rescue mission. It felt like coming home. Healing wasn't a destination, she realized. It was a daily return to herself, to truth, to the quiet courage of choosing differently. And with each choice, the weight she'd carried for years grew lighter, until one day she woke up and noticed. She was no longer bracing for the fall. She was learning how to fly. Food for thought. Take a moment to consider. What do you carry that is unseen yet heavy? Is it a belief that you must always be strong? A guilt that never seems to dissipate? A fear that has been quietly guiding your choices? These weights often feel normal because we have carried them for so long, but noticing them is the first act of liberation, reflection, and invitation. Find a quiet space and take a few deep breaths. Ask yourself, what emotional burdens am I carrying that I have ignored or minimized? How have past experiences shaped my responses to life today? What small acknowledgement or act of compassion can I offer myself now to begin releasing these weights? Write down anything that surfaces. There is no rush, no judgment, only the gentle recognition that awareness is the first step toward healing. The process of understanding your weight is not about removing it overnight. It is about noticing it, naming it, and beginning the conversation with yourself that will lead to freedom. Chapter 3. Reconnecting with your inner world. After beginning to notice the quiet stirrings within and acknowledging the weight you carry, the next step is to reconnect with the part of yourself that has always been there, the part that knows, feels, and senses, even when life has tried to drown it out. Reconnection is not about forcing change. It is about returning to a space of curiosity, compassion, and presence. Our inner world, our thoughts, emotions, and sensations, is like a garden, each aspect requiring care and nurturing. Some areas have been tended carefully, cultivated with love and intention, while others may have been left wild or neglected, overrun with weeds of fear, doubt, and old trauma. Just as a gardener must survey their plot, assessing which plants thrive and which need attention, we too must walk gently through this inner garden. In a process of reconnecting, we learn to notice what has been growing. This involves slowing down and allowing ourselves the space to feel without judgment. As we observe our emotions, we can begin to identify the sources of our discomfort, understanding that these feelings are not obstacles, but rather indicators of areas within us that require our care and attention. Perhaps you'll discover patches of joy that have been overshadowed by self-doubt, or resilience that could be reignited despite past challenges. By practicing this level of awareness, we learn to nurture what is alive and vibrant within us. It's an invitation to acknowledge your strengths, passions, and dreams, those elements of your being that reflect your authentic essence and have been waiting patiently for you to revisit them. Cultivating this reconnection also means forgiving the neglected parts of ourselves and approaching them with kindness. Just as a garden requires weeding to flourish, we must clear the narratives that no longer serve us, allowing space for growth. This gentle tending becomes a form of self-care as we replace harmful beliefs with affirmations of our worthiness and potential. The process is neither linear nor complete. Rather, it is a dynamic relationship with ourselves that evolves with time and intention. By honoring our inner landscape, we can better weave together our past experiences and present emotions, creating a tapestry of understanding that empowers us to step boldly into the future. As we move through this journey of reconnection, remember to remain curious. Embrace the questions that arise and let them guide you deeper into your heart. Allow yourself to feel the fullness of your emotions, to celebrate your victories, and to learn from your challenges. In doing so, you will find that the path to nurturing your inner garden is as much about acceptance and exploration as it is about growth and renewal. In this nurturing environment, healing takes place. The quiet stirrings you once dismissed will become a chorus of clarity and purpose, guiding you toward a life led by authenticity and self-awareness. Welcome this reconnection not as a task to be completed, but as a lifelong journey toward embracing the true, multifaceted self that lies within. Here are 3 stories of reconnection. Elena's story. Elena had spent years moving through life on autopilot. She rarely paused to notice her feelings, believing they were inconvenient distractions. One day, during a quiet evening of journaling, she saw a wave of sadness she had never acknowledged. Rather than pushing it away, she allowed herself to sit with it. Over time, she began listening more closely to her body's sensations and the subtle messages of her mind. She realized her inner life was a compass, patiently waiting for her attention. She began to notice the rhythm of her breath as she walked to the kitchen, the way the cool tiles underfoot steadied the fluttering in her chest. The kettle whistled, and instead of slipping into the automatic, make coffee, check email, stare at the screen loop, she paused. She lifted the mug, feeling the porcelain's smooth curve, and let the steam curl up, tasting the faint citrus of the tea she'd added on a whim that morning. The simple act became a ritual of presence, an invitation to ask, "What does this moment ask of me?" In the days that followed, Elena's journal transformed from a list of tasks to a conversation with herself. She started each entry with a question, "What am I feeling right now?" and wrote not just the answer but the textures that accompanied it. The heaviness in her shoulders, the tingling in her fingers when she thought of an old, unfinished painting. This warm glow rose when she remembered a laugh shared with a neighbor. The pages were filled with sketches of clouds, spirals of ink, and occasional torn-out newspaper clippings, reminders of the world she had once observed through a fogged glass. One rainy Thursday, she found herself lingering at a small gallery she'd passed 100 times without noticing. The exhibition was titled Cartographies of the Unseen, a collection of maps drawn from personal memories. As she stood before a hand-drawn map of a childhood backyard, the lines traced in charcoal felt oddly familiar. The artist had labeled a shaded corner, the place where doubts settle. Elena's heart softened, recognizing the same shadows she had cataloged in her own notebook. She turned to the curator, a woman with silver hair and bright eyes, and asked, "How do you decide which parts of yourself to chart?" Marcus' story. Marcus began to notice subtle shifts in his daily life. During meetings, where once he dominated conversations with data-driven arguments, he now paused, letting silence settle like ink in water. Colleagues grew accustomed to his newfound stillness, often mistaking it for indecision. But Marcus felt the opposite, clearer than he'd ever been. One crisp autumn afternoon, his team faced a crisis. A key client had pulled out of a high-stakes project, and the room erupted into panic. Spreadsheets were recalculated, contingency plans dissected. Marcus, instead, closed his eyes. A memory surfaced, the way the client's representative had leaned forward during their last meeting, not with excitement, but with the rigid posture of someone hiding doubt. Marcus opened his eyes. "We missed the signs," he said quietly. "This isn't just about numbers. They were unstable long before today. His team bristled. How could he know? But he shared his recollection, and slowly the pieces aligned. The client's hesitation had been written in their body language, their half-answers. Marcus had simply seen it. For the first time, he didn't shy from the word. Intuition had guided him. He began to experiment. At home, he followed the pull of spontaneity, a weekend drive instead of scheduled workout, a phone call to an old friend he'd avoided for years. The world felt less predictable, but also less suffocating. His walks grew shorter. The insights no longer required solitude. Yet, he kept returning to the path by the river, where the wind carried the scent of fallen leaves. There, he learned to distinguish between fear's urgent whispers and intuition's gentle nudge. By winter, Marcus had not solved all his complexities, but he no longer feared them. When his boss offered a promotion that would tether him to late nights and endless emails, he declined. The room gaped. "You've changed," she remarked, as if it were a flaw. He smiled. Finally, he thought, "I'm catching up to who I was all along." Now he consults for startups, not for the prestige, but for the thrill of sensing a business's heartbeat before metrics confirm it. His desk is cluttered with notes, some analytical, some scrawled with phrases like "something feels off here." He's learning to trust the latter more than the former. Marcus still walks alone sometimes, but when he does, he no longer feels like he's searching. The river, the sky, his own breathing, all of it hums in harmony, a quiet reminder. The answers were always within. Layla's story. Layla's journey towards self-trust began to ripple outward, altering the quiet rhythm of her days. One crisp morning, as her colleague, Marcus, slid a stack of files on her desk with a breezy, "Can you handle these? My nephew's sick." She felt the familiar tug of obligation. But this time, the tension in her shoulders didn't vanish as it once would have after agreeing. Instead, it pooled into her chest, a heavy cloudburst of unease. She paused, fingertips brushing the edge of her desk, and inhaled deeply, a grounding technique her therapist, Amara, had taught her. "What do you need here?" The question echoed in her mind, a gentle compass. She shook her head, surprise lacing her voice. "I can't take this on, Marcus. I'm swamped with my own deadlines." The words, once foreign, now felt like a key turning in a long-forgotten lock. She braced for guilt, but instead, a curious calm washed over her as she watched Marcus process her response. He nodded, awkward but understanding, and walked away. That afternoon, Layla found herself in the park, a habit she'd started to reacquaint herself with the world beyond duty. She sat under the skeletal branches of a magnolia tree, sketchbook in lap, and sketched the way light fractured through the bare limbs, a hobby she'd abandoned years ago, buried beneath the weight of caretaking. The act of creating, of seeing rather than fixing, stirred something tender in her. Her pen hesitated at a crooked branch, mirroring the tentative growth of her own self-trust. When she returned home, she lit a candle, its flame a small rebellion against the shadows she'd once let fester. That night, she dreamed of a garden where each flower had its own soil, its own season, no bloom outshining another. Weeks later, the tension in her shoulders eased, replaced by the quiet strength of boundaries. She still checked in, daily, fiercely, with her inner world, learning its landscapes with growing curiosity. And though challenges lingered, she no longer mistook her needs for selfishness. Instead, she saw them as the roots of a tree, learning to hold both sky and soil. Food for thought. Reconnecting with your inner world is both subtle and profound. Start by noticing your breath, your body sensations, and the emotions that arise without trying to fix them. Journaling, meditation, or even quiet moments of stillness can help you hear your inner voice. Scientific research supports this. Mindfulness and self-reflection practices strengthen neural pathways that improve emotional regulation, self-awareness, and resilience. The more we pay attention to our inner world, the more capable we become of responding to life with clarity and compassion rather than reacting from old patterns. Reflection and invitation. Find a quiet space, close your eyes if you feel comfortable, and take a deep breath. Ask yourself, when was the last time I truly listened to my inner voice? What emotions or sensations have I been dismissing or avoiding? What small step can I take today to nurture a deeper connection with myself. Write down your thoughts, feelings, or even questions that arise. There is no right or wrong. Each moment of awareness is a thread, slowly weaving you back into the fullness of your inner life. Remember, the goal is not to rush or force reconnection. It is to begin the gentle act of returning home to yourself. Chapter 4. Learning to rest without guilt. Many of us have been conditioned to believe that rest is something we must earn, often viewing it as a luxury reserved for those who have worked hard enough. This mindset is reinforced by societal pressures, family expectations, and even our own inner critic, all of which tend to equate productivity with worthiness. From a young age, we're tasked with messages that prioritize busyness and achievement over well-being and balance. We grow accustomed to the idea that our value is measured by our output, leading us to push through fatigue and dismiss our need for restoration. However, it's essential to recognize that rest is not a reward for hard work. Rather, it is a necessity woven into the fabric of a healthy and fulfilling life. Just as our bodies require food and hydration to function optimally, our minds and spirits also need periods of reprieve to integrate experiences, release tension, and recalibrate for the challenges ahead. Without adequate rest, we effectively hinder our ability to thrive both personally and professionally. Scientific studies consistently reveal that intentional rest plays a crucial role in enhancing brain function, emotional regulation, and overall physical health. During restorative moments, our brains engage in processes that bolster creativity, problem-solving, and decision-making capabilities. Conversely, chronic overwork and the neglect of our emotional well-being can lead to fatigue, irritability, decreased productivity, and, ultimately, physical illness. This cycle of neglect often results in a downward spiral, where the need for rest becomes increasingly urgent, yet remains unmet because of guilt over taking a break. However, it's vital to shift our perspective and understand that rest is not indulgence. It is self-preservation. Fostering a mindset that embraces the necessity of rest means acknowledging our inherent worth, irrespective of our achievements. Learning to rest without guilt is a profound step toward honoring yourself as a complete being. It involves recognizing that you are worthy of care and compassion simply for existing. Taking time to replenish your energy allows you to show up more fully in every aspect of your life, not just in moments of high productivity. By prioritizing rest, we build resilience and the capacity to engage meaningfully with our responsibilities, relationships, and passions, ultimately leading to a more balanced and fulfilling life. In essence, embracing rest is an act of empowerment, a declaration that you value your well-being as an integral aspect of your journey. Here are 3 stories of discovering the power of rest. Sophie's story. Sophie was a high-achieving professional who felt she could never slow down. She often stayed late at the office, skipped meals, and pushed through exhaustion, believing that any pause was a sign of weakness. One weekend, she reluctantly allowed herself a quiet morning at home. To her surprise, she felt calmer, clearer, and more creative than she had in months. She realized that rest was not wasted time. It was a vital part of sustaining her energy and focus. But the changes didn't stop at saying no or sketching quiet moments in parks. They seeped into the silences between conversations, into the way Layla began to listen, to others, yes, but more importantly, to herself. One Thursday, during a team meeting that usually left her drained and invisible, she surprised even herself. As the group debated a new project rollout, voices overlapping with urgency, Layla noticed how the conversation kept circling back to timelines and deliverables. Still, no one was asking why they were doing it, or who it truly served. A familiar knot tightened in her stomach, not from stress this time, but from a rising conviction. This doesn't feel right. Her pulse fluttered. She could stay quiet. She always stayed quiet. But then she remembered the dream, the garden, each flower growing in its own time, unapologetic in its rhythm. She cleared her throat. "I know we're focused on speed," she began, her voice soft but steady. "But what if we're rushing past the heart of it? What if this project needs breathing room, more research, more empathy? What if the best version of this isn't the fastest one?" A beat of silence. Then murmurs, not dismissal but thought. Her manager, Rena, leaned forward, intrigued. Say more, she said. And Layla did. She spoke about user pain points they'd skimmed over, about data they'd assumed rather than validated, about the quiet exhaustion she saw not just in clients but in her own team. She didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, that didn't paralyze her. It freed her. Ideas spilled out, not as solutions, but as invitations to slow down, to wonder, to care differently. After the meeting, Rena pulled her aside. That was brave, she said simply, and needed. Layla walked to the cafe across the street, heart still humming. She ordered her favorite jasmine tea and sat by the window, watching the city breathe through its afternoon haze. She pulled out her sketchbook and drew not trees this time, but a spiral, a shape that moved forward while circling back, never linear, constantly growing. Beneath it, she wrote, "My voice is part of the work, not in the way, but as a way in." That evening, she called her sister, Nadia, who had long been the center of her sacrifices, the missed trips, the canceled plans, the "I'll be right over" texts at midnight. They'd grown distant, not from lack of love, but from imbalance. "I've been thinking," Layla said, hands wrapped around her cooling mug. "I won't be there for you, Nadia, but I need to be there for me, too. And I'm learning how." There was a pause on the line, then a soft, "I've missed you, Layla. The real you. Not the one who just says yes." Tears pricked her eyes. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a blame. It was clarity. Over the following weeks, Layla began tending to relationships like gardens, some needing space to regrow, others needing honest pruning. She joined a writing group for women over 30 reclaiming their creativity. She started meditating not to fix herself, but to greet herself, each morning, each version, each shadow and light. And when her mother called, anxious about a doctor's visit and instinctively reaching for Layla's reassurance, the same pattern that had shaped her life for decades, Layla didn't rush in. She breathed. She listened. Then she said, "I'm here with you, Mama, but I trust you to handle this. You're stronger than you think." Her mother was silent. Then, quietly, "Maybe I am." The ripple had become a current. One spring morning, months after that first no to Marcus, Layla stood barefoot in her tiny backyard, planting marigold seeds in a row of salvage clay pots. The sun warmed her shoulders. Her hands were dirty. Her heart was whole. She knew the path wasn't straight. There would still be days when she doubted, moments when she forgot herself. But now, she carried an inner compass, calibrated not to others' expectations, but to her own quiet truth. And in that truth, she was finally, beautifully becoming. Ethan's story. Ethan, a devoted father, rarely allowed himself moments of solitude. Even small breaks felt like selfishness. After a particularly stressful week, he began intentionally setting aside 20 minutes each day to sit quietly, breathe, and notice his body sensations. Over time, he discovered that these brief moments of rest reduced his anxiety, improved his patience with his children, and deepened his connection to himself. At first, Ethan would set the timer on his phone like a secret ritual, 20 minutes tucked between bedtime stories and late-night dishwashing. When the house finally settled into a hush, he'd sit in the worn armchair in the corner of the living room, the one with the crooked leg propped up by a stack of old books, and close his eyes. The silence felt foreign, almost uncomfortable. His mind raced with to-do lists, laundry, school forms, grocery run. Did I reply to that email? But he stayed. He breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth. He noticed the way his shoulders clung to tension like old friends unwilling to leave, the flicker of a headache behind his left temple, the warmth of the lamplight on his hands. One rainy Tuesday, halfway through his third week of the practice, something shifted. The usual mental storm didn't come. Instead, he became aware of the sound of water tapping against the window pane, a rhythm so gentle it felt like nature's own lullaby. He noticed the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant laughter from a sitcom drifting from his teenage daughter's open door. For the first time in years, he wasn't trying to fix, plan, or protect. He was simply there. And in that stillness, memories surfaced, not as intrusions, but as quiet visitors. He teaches his youngest to ride a bike on a sun-soaked sidewalk, her giggles echoing like wind chimes, and sitting cross-legged on the floor, helping his son build a wobbly tower of blocks that would inevitably collapse with a joyful crash. These moments, once lost in the blur of daily hustle, now bloomed in his awareness, vivid and tender. Soon, the changes began to ripple into his days. He found himself pausing before reacting when his daughter left muddy footprints across the freshly mopped floor. Instead of snapping, he knelt and said, "Looks like someone had an adventure," and she beamed with unguarded pride. He started listening more, really listening, when his son described the intricate plot of his made-up superhero world, not just nodding while mentally composing his grocery list. One evening, his 8-year-old crawled into his lap unprompted, resting her head against his chest. "You smell calm now," she murmured, half asleep. Ethan froze, then smiled, blinking back unexpected tears. "I feel calm," he whispered. He realized that by permitting himself to rest, he wasn't stealing time from his family. He was returning to them more fully. He began sharing his practice with them, turning it into a family ritual. On weekend mornings, they'd gather on the living room floor with blankets and pillows, playing a guided meditation game they called Quiet Time Adventure. His teenage daughter rolled her eyes at first, but soon found herself lingering after, commenting on how weirdly good it felt just to breathe. Ethan's journey wasn't about escaping fatherhood, but about honoring it by first honoring himself. In those quiet 20 minutes each day, he wasn't just finding peace. He was remembering who he was beneath the roles, the responsibilities, the endless doing, and in remembering himself, he discovered he could love them more deeply, not because he did more, but because he finally allowed himself to be. Maya's story. Maya's mornings began to shift. Where once she'd sprinted through coffee preparation, cup in one hand, phone blaring deadlines in the other, she now lingered. She measured her tea leaves with care, watching them unfurl in steaming water like tiny, deliberate origami. The first time she noticed a sparrow perched on her windowsill, she paused, really paused, and the guilt that had once coiled in her chest unspooled. It was a small thing, this quiet, but it felt like weaving a new thread into the fabric of her day. At work, her focus sharpened. During meetings, instead of mentally drafting responses while others spoke, she leaned into the stillness between words. Colleagues began to remark on her unusual clarity. When her team hit a creative wall on a project, she suggested a 20-minute walk outside. They hesitated, but as they strolled the park path, Maya pointed out how the sunlight fractured through the trees, a mosaic of gold and green. "What if we approach the design like this?" she mused. And suddenly, ideas cascaded. The client loved the concept, but more unexpectedly, Maya didn't feel the usual adrenaline crash afterward. She felt anchored, yet the old habits lingered. One afternoon, as her workload spiked, the familiar voice crept in. "You're only valuable when you're grinding." Her shoulders tensed, her breath shallow. But this time, she recognized the pattern. She excused herself, closed her office door, and did something radical. She sat in a chair, feet flat on the floor, and spent 5 minutes breathing in time with the ticking clock. When she returned to her desk, she rearranged her to-do list, crossing off tasks that weren't hers to carry. It was the first time she'd said no without apologizing. Her relationships deepened, too. On a Thursday evening, she met her friend Liam for dinner. Instead of splitting her attention between their conversation and her emails, she tasted the rosemary-infused oil on her appetizer, really heard Liam's stories about his mother's recovery, and laughed so hard at his joke about office printers that tears came. Later, he said, "You're different, lighter." She realized she was hungry, not for productivity, but for presence. Maya didn't abandon her drive. She simply no longer conflated it with worth. She learned to read her body's signals. A clenched jaw meant it was time for a stretch. A racing heart meant a pause, not a push. When her boss offered her a high-stakes project, she accepted not out of fear, but out of curiosity. And as she worked, she kept a new mantra close. Rest is not the absence of work. It is the breath between notes in a symphony. The results surprised her. Her ideas felt bolder, her collaborations more profound, her joy quieter but unshakable. Rest, she realized, wasn't a finish line. It was the soil where she'd finally let herself grow. Food for thought. Rest is not passive, it is regenerative. Emotional and physical rest allows the nervous system to reset, memories to integrate, and the mind to process experiences. The more you practice resting without judgment, the more naturally your body and mind will return to balance. Notice that rest comes in many forms: sleep, quiet reflection, walks in nature, mindful breathing, or even moments of stillness amidst your day. The key is to honor the need rather than resist it. Reflection and invitation. Take a few moments now. Close your eyes if you can, and feel the rhythm of your breath. Ask yourself, how do I think about resting? Does guilt arise? Where in my body do I feel tension that might ease with rest? What slight, intentional pause can I give myself today without judgment? Write down your thoughts, or even schedule a small rest ritual for yourself. Each pause is an act of self-respect, a message to your body and mind that they are valued. Remember, you are worthy of rest, renewal, and gentleness. Chapter 5. Releasing Old Narratives. From the moment we begin to notice ourselves, we start absorbing messages about who we are, what we deserve, and how the world perceives us. These messages can come from various sources: family dynamics, societal norms, and cultural expectations, all of which play a significant role in shaping our identities. Additionally, many of these beliefs stem from our personal interpretations of experiences, often colored by our emotions and perspectives at the time. As we encounter different situations, we interpret them through our unique filters, and these interpretations can solidify into beliefs that we carry forward. Over time, these beliefs form complex narratives that can feel like undeniable truths. They shape how we think about ourselves, influence our emotional responses, and guide our decisions. For example, a child who consistently hears that they are too sensitive may grow up believing that their emotional depth is a flaw, leading to a lifetime of self-criticism and avoidance of vulnerability. Similarly, someone raised in a high-achieving environment may feel that their worth is tied solely to accomplishments, creating unrelenting pressure that overshadows their true passions and interests. Yet, it is crucial to acknowledge that not all narratives serve us well. Some can impede our growth, trap us in cycles of self-doubt, or foster beliefs that we are inherently unworthy. They might create unnecessary suffering or lead to self-sabotage in various forms. For instance, the belief that one must always strive for perfection may stifle creativity and prevent individuals from taking meaningful risks. In recognizing this, we start to see the power of our narratives, not just as passive backstories, but as active influences in our daily lives. Releasing old narratives, however, is not about erasing your past or diminishing the value of your experiences. Instead, it involves a conscious and compassionate recognition of which stories no longer reflect your authentic self. This process can be akin to decluttering a space overrun with items no longer needed or cherished. It allows for the gentle acknowledgement of the narratives that have shaped you, celebrating those that have contributed positively to your journey, while letting go of those that do not align with your current truth. In this journey of transformation, the focus shifts toward choosing new narratives that foster growth, self-compassion, and authenticity. It's about reframing your story to highlight resilience, the lessons learned, and the infinite potential that lies ahead. As you begin to embrace these new narratives, they empower you to make decisions aligned with your values and aspirations, ultimately guiding you toward becoming the person you are meant to be. Allowing yourself to explore and embrace this evolution opens doors to a future filled with possibility, joy, and a deeper understanding of your unique path. Here are 3 stories of releasing old narratives. Nina's story. Nina had always believed that her worth was tied to her productivity. She thought that if she slowed down, rested, or prioritized her needs, she would be selfish and inadequate. Over time, she noticed the exhaustion, irritability, and resentment this narrative caused. Through journaling and reflective exercises, she began questioning this belief. Slowly, she rewrote the story she told herself. Her value was inherent, not earned through constant achievement. One crisp morning, as golden leaves swirled outside her window, Nina did something radical. She hit snooze. The guilt prickled at first, a familiar itch in her chest, but she silenced it with a breath. savoring the warmth of her blanket. By 8 a.m., she was in the kitchen, brewing tea instead of drafting emails. The quiet was unsettling at first, but as sunlight spilled across the counter, she noticed the way the steam curled upward like a tiny, fleeting sculpture, proof that beauty existed simply because. She began to experiment. A weekend morning was devoted not to chores but to painting, her hands smudged with acrylics as she captured the way light filtered through her curtains. The result was abstract, messy, and unproductive, and yet when she stepped back, she felt something shift. The canvas wasn't a task completed. It was a declaration that she was allowed to exist without becoming a list. At work, the old instincts resurfaced. When her boss asked her to lead an overwhelming project, her first thought was to say yes, to prove her worth. But this time she paused. "I need to bring the right team on board," she suggested, her voice steady. "And maybe break this into phases." Her boss agreed, impressed. Nina surprised herself, not by denying the work, but by redefining how she approached it. She delegated, set clear hours, and took walks at noon, breathing in the autumn air. Her efficiency didn't wane. If anything, her clarity made her more effective. Her friend Marco noticed. "You're brighter," he said one evening, as they sat on a park bench, sharing dark chocolate. "Like you're not dimming yourself to fit someone else's light." Nina laughed, the sound lighter than she'd expected, and admitted the truth. She'd spent years wearing a mask so heavy she'd forgotten her own features. Of course, the old fears crept back, late at night, when her to-do list loomed, or when a colleague boasted about working 80-hour weeks. But Nina had tools now. She'd jot down one kind thing she'd done for herself that day. She'd traced the outline of her hand, a quiet reminder. This body, these hands, they're not just vessels for output. They are sacred, regardless. By spring, a small plant she'd nearly killed now thrived on her windowsill, its leaves unfurling like a metaphor she didn't need to overthink. Nina still worked hard, but she no longer measured her days in what she did. She measured them in what she felt. The grounded calm of a morning well-rested, the thrill of a hobby mastered not for a resume, but for joy, the quiet pride of a life unapologetically tended. Her story had changed, and this time, the plot had space to breathe. Leo's story. Leo realized that many of his life choices were based on expectations inherited from his family. He pursued a career he didn't love and entered relationships that felt familiar but unfulfilling. With guidance and reflection, he recognized the narrative. I must meet others' expectations to be loved. By observing this belief without judgment, he began crafting a new story, one where his choices were aligned with his own values and desires. And with that new space, Nina started to notice things she'd once overlooked, the rhythm of her own breath when she wasn't racing to the next task, the way her heart softened when she listened instead of performed, the richness of silence that wasn't just the absence of noise, but a kind of presence. She started taking walks without headphones, letting the city's symphony, the clatter of tram wheels, distant laughter, birdsong tangled in telephone wires, seep into her like music meant only for her ears. One afternoon, while flipping through an old journal from years before, she found a list titled, "What I Must Accomplish to Be Enough." The demands were ruthless. Get promoted. Be always reliable. Never say no. Finish everything. Be admired. She read it with a quiet ache, not because it was painful, but because it felt like a letter from a stranger who had mistaken armor for skin. She tore the page out carefully and carried it to her balcony. Lighting a match, she held it at the corner until the edges curled into black lace. As the ashes drifted like burnt snowflakes into the wind, she whispered, "You don't have to earn your right to exist." It wasn't a shout of rebellion, but a gentle benediction, one she was finally ready to believe. Her relationship with time began to shift. No longer a tyrant counting down to her subsequent failure, time became something more malleable, something generous. She started scheduling unproductive hours, golden blocks in her calendar marked for wonder. Sometimes that meant staring at clouds, or rereading a poem 3 times just to savor the way the words folded into one another. She bought a small fountain for her living room, the kind with a gentle trickle that echoed through her evenings. She realized she'd never had a sound in her home that wasn't functional. No music unless she was cleaning, no silence unless she was asleep. Now, The water reminded her that some things exist simply to be enjoyed. When her younger sister called, frazzled and near tears after a performance review, Nina didn't offer solutions or hustle tips. Instead, she said, "I'm sorry it feels so heavy. You're so much more than what they measure." The words flowed easily because she was speaking not just to her sister, but to her younger self. She began volunteering at a community garden on weekends, not to add another line to her resume, but because she loved the smell of damp soil and the quiet company of people who planted things knowing they might not be the ones to see them bloom. One day, an elderly neighbor brought her a jar of homemade plum jam with a note, "For the girl who remembers how to grow." Nina held it in her hands like a relic, tears pricking her eyes. She hadn't realized that tending to something, anything, could be an act of love, not labor. And love, she slowly understood, was not something you earned through output. It was something you practiced. In how you poured tea for a friend. In how you forgave yourself for being tired. In how you chose again and again to come back to your breath, to this moment, to the truth that you were already whole. One rainy evening, she sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by half-finished sketchbooks, dried paintbrushes, and a novel she'd been reading slowly, savoring each sentence like a piece of fruit. Her cat curled in her lap, purring a deep, grounding rhythm. Nina rested her hands on her stomach, feeling the rise and fall of her own breath, and smiled. The world would always have demands. There would always be voices, external and internal, that equated worth with speed, with yield, with visible results. But now, Nina carried a quiet revolution within her. She wasn't rejecting ambition or hard work. She was simply refusing to let them define her. She was no longer a machine fine-tuned for output. She was a woman learning how to live. And for the first time, that was more than enough. Arya's story. Arya had internalized the idea that vulnerability was weakness. She rarely expressed her emotions, believing they would make her unworthy of connection. Through therapy and small experiments with openness, she discovered that vulnerability was a bridge, not a barrier. By releasing the narrative that emotions equate to weakness, Arya allowed herself to experience deeper relationships and greater self-acceptance. Food for thought. Take a quiet moment and reflect on the narratives you carry. Ask yourself, which beliefs or stories do I tell myself that create limitations or fear? Which narratives have shaped my choices, emotions, or relationships in ways that no longer serve me? What new story would better reflect my truth and the life I want to live? Writing down these reflections can be powerful. You might even notice stories repeating in your life, patterns that signal it's time to let go. Remember, releasing old narratives is not a one-time event. It is a gentle, ongoing process of awareness, choice, and self-compassion, reflection, and invitation. Set aside a few minutes to write or meditate. Consider, which story about myself am I ready to release? What gentle action can I take today to support a new, more empowering narrative? Even small steps, like noticing your inner dialogue, challenging limiting beliefs, or speaking your truth, are acts of liberation. As you release these old narratives, you create space for authenticity, courage, and the light within you to shine more freely. As this sample journey comes to a pause, remember, what you've just heard is only the beginning. The first chapters open the door to awareness, rest, and the quiet work of reconnecting with your inner world. But beyond this moment, the path continues to unfold into deeper shifts of identity, renewed vision, and the courage to live from what truly feels aligned. If something within you stirred as you listened, a sense of recognition, a spark of possibility, or a gentle nudge toward what's next, consider that an invitation. You can continue this journey by purchasing the full ebook. The link is waiting for you in the show notes, ready when you are. Thank you for sharing this space with me. When you're ready to move forward, the next chapters are there to walk with you, one faithful step at a time.